Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Good evening. My name is Chris James. As said, I am one of the product managers that work on SciVal, based here in Amsterdam. And what I'd like to talk today is briefly about a couple of new features which are out on SciVal. One of them is to do with mapping authorship, and the other one is to do with actually looking at the SDGs. And I know that Christian, after me, will go into a bit more detail about this on the Pure side. So you'll see it from two sides, on Pure and on SciVal. So before I get started, I think it's interesting just to look at what is available now, what the capabilities are today. I mean, when we look at how people have been looking at research and the impact of research, originally it was basically just looking at scholarly output, looking at things like citation count, and then you can combine the two, and then you have cites per publication, for example. But now with big data technology, which is what SciVal runs under, it makes other metrics possible, things like outputs in top citation percentiles, field weighted metrics. And so it allows more nuance into the metrics which are used and the kind of stories that can be brought as a result of these metrics. And so that's what these two new sort of new capabilities in SciVal are additional nuances to help you get a better idea about the impact of your research. So the first one I'll look at is authorship. And this is basically allowing you to get an approximation of a researcher's contribution to research output through their position in the document. And as I say, it is an approximation, and I'll go into some of the nuances on that as well. And then with the SDGs, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, it's really looking at the research which is being done towards the goals and targets of each of these. So I'll start with the authorship. When you look at traditional metrics, the majority of publications that are created out there are created with multiple co-authors. And with the traditional metrics, each co-author gets the same impact. So it means the scholarly output counts the same for them, and the citations count the same, even though their actual contribution may be quite different. So for example, here we have a publication with 10 co-authors, and this publication receives 5 citations. Each of those co-authors receive the 5 citations. So with the with authorship metrics, what it allows you to do is not to, we haven't gone and actually divided up the citations, but it allows you to look at publications where you could potentially have had more impact than in other publications. So in this case, looking at where you're the first and corresponding author, you can see, am I performing above average when I'm the first and corresponding author? Can I see a transition in my history from being a first to a corresponding author, or maybe starting from just being a co-author to being a first or corresponding author? When you look at an institution, obviously you can see the change over time. So what's the change in our research over time? But also another one is being able to see, are we leading the research, or are we kind of piggybacking on other institutions, so being just a co-author? One thing to point out is that this is based upon the information we get from Scopus, because SciVal is based on Scopus data, and that the co-authorship, the order of the co-authorship, is not always a sort of an importance ranking. So in some subject areas, so high energy physics, mathematics, economics, quite often the co-authors are listed in the alphabet. So you need to be aware of, again, the nuances in order to be able to use this. But in some other areas, like in biomedicine, it is like the first author, corresponding author are usually the ones who are putting more putting more into the research than others. Yeah, so it's to be used as a guideline. So what I'd like to do is just show a couple of slides of how this would look like. So for example, here in SciVal, we're comparing a researcher, and you can see the amount of output they have as a first and corresponding author, and the amount of output they have in all of their publications. And you can also get an idea about the impact of that. So you can look at different metrics for that over time and make a comparison as well. I'm going to move swiftly on now to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So the UN Sustainable Development Goals, they've been out for years. They were adopted in 2015, And basically they are a global challenge. What they're looking for is to build a world where no one is left behind. There are 17 goals in total, and within those goals, there are 169 associated targets, and these are all considered to be very important. What we have in SciVal is we have 16 of these 17 goals available as research areas, and these come from search queries which have come from Scopus, and I'll go into a little bit of detail about how they have come about in the first place. The 17th is really looking at the the collaboration to reach these goals. So it wasn't very easy to create a search for that. So we haven't done that yet, but there's something we're looking to do later in the year. So in SciVal, you see on the left-hand side, we have these research areas. These are, each research area is for the different SDGs. And as I mentioned, they come from a set of search strings which were created for each SDG. And in fact, the SDG search strings have been around for a little while. I mean, back in December 2018, we were asked to create some search queries for 7 of the SDGs, which was used in the THE's impact rankings back in 2019, so their first rankings. We obviously soon realized that having 7 of them out of the 17 wouldn't be enough, so we improved the queries to be more precise, and we expanded them to the 16 SDGs. And those are now being used in the 2020 impact rankings. As part of my work, I wanted to put these into SciVal, and we did some testing with customers. And as a result of this, 3 customers said, we would like to work further with you on improving the matching of documents. So I started up a partnership with Aurora, which is comes from the Vrije Universiteit in Amsterdam, Auckland University, and Southern Denmark University. And we're using a combination of machine learning and query improvement to improve this mapping. We also started collecting feedback about the papers. So you can give feedback on the SDGs and help us actually validate our data sets. And I'll show some more on that. And we will have an improved query. The idea is to have an improved query by the end of the year. It may extend into next year because COVID has kind of pushed everything a little bit so far as the timings are concerned. So as I mentioned, we have this initiative in place. It is to map the reach to the documents, and we don't want to do this alone, but we also want to get buy-in from the larger research community. So we're working with these 3 institutions along with ourselves, of course. And if I just skip on. But the issue is that the research that's mapped to these SDGs is somewhat upstream from the goals. So what I mean by this is when you look at the research that comes in, the research is produced, and then that research can go in to influence things like practices in policy. It could influence new tools which are created. Maybe there are practices which happen which are not documented, which these changes affect. And these will affect the different goals within an SDG, and those at the end will affect the SDG itself. Now, because of this, we are using search queries, which, if you don't have the correct word in your document for the search query, then your document may show up, which is why we're also using machine learning. But in order to make this as accurate as possible, we do need some validation from the community, which is why we have created a feedback tool. So this is the one that Elsevier has created. So I know that there was one that Aurora had also created, who's shared their data with us. But if you go to this link, so sdgresources.relex.com/feedback, or if you type in SDG feedback on the RELX Resource Center, you'll come up with this. You can go to each of the SDGs, have a look at some of the publications that come up as a result of these queries, and then you can give feedback. Yes, it belongs here. No, it doesn't belong here, and give more detail. If you have publications yourself which relate to different SDGs, you can also upload your own set of documents per SDG, and we will use that to help validate the queries and the machine learning that we're doing. So please, if you feel these are important, if you'd like to help us with improving these, and we will make all our findings freely available as we did last time, then please go onto the site and give your feedback. Okay, So what does this mean in practice? I'd like to show you a site which we have. So if you don't have access to SciVal, you can still access this link. So scival.com/SDG, and you will be brought to this page, which has a little bit of introduction about the SDGs. If you scroll down to the bottom, it has some interesting links, webinars, resources, etc. But then the meat of it is basically being able to click on one of the SDGs that you see there. So I actually, in my demo, I clicked on SDG 16. And the first thing you see is a key phrase analysis, so for the last 5 years. So what you see here is 171,000 papers. SciVal has extracted the key terms from these papers and put it into a word cloud, so you get an idea straight away what is being covered here. And if you scroll down a bit further, you can then see the topic clusters in SciVal. So these are groups of documents which have formed, which have relationships formed based upon their direct citation linking. So this is using citations to form document clusters. You can then see the document clusters which are contributing to this SDG, that have the most amount of papers in this SDG. And then scrolling down further still, you can see the institutions globally and also the countries which are working in this. Don't worry, it's not always Harvard and Oxford who are the top two. There are other universities as well. And then if you happen to have access to SciVal, there's an analyze in more detail button at the top there. And if you click this, then basically it takes you to that SDG in SciVal, where you can get a lot more information. So here you can see the number of documents, you can see the normalized, so the field-weighted citation impact. You can also see things like the number of view counts, citation counts, this key phrase analysis. You see there's institutions, authors, the journals, etc., which are linked to it. So you can scroll through any of that. And in fact, what I wanted to show is quickly, if you were interested in looking at yourself, for example, as an institution, then you would just go to the institutions tab, which would then list all the institutions in the world, and you can select the region that your institution comes from. I was feeling summary, so I chose Brazil. So imagine I'm from the University of Sao Paulo. I can see there's 500 plus documents from the university, and I can turn that set of documents into its own little research area. So take those documents, it turns, with a couple of clicks in SciVal, I can then straight away see these 591 documents. And now I'm looking at Sao Paulo's output in SDG 16 as based on this query. So in peace, justice, and strong institutions. So what their outputs are, you can see which researchers, who are they collaborating with, what's the impact of that research, and also, what are the key phrases which are being pulled from the research. So I'll pause there. I don't know if any questions came in, but I say this is just a short demo on what we're doing on the SDGs. Also, I'd like to mention, we realize that this is not the end. We are constantly looking to improve the search queries which are made available, which is why we're working with the community, why we're working with this small group of institutions, and we will be looking to expand it later next year. And as I say, everything we find, we will make freely available on Mendeley as well, so that you can use this data in your own work streams.
Thanks very much for the presentation, Chris. Both of these are certainly topics that have come up a lot in the conversations recently, particularly around the SDGs as well. And it's SciVal's providing a really interesting resource to help understand how our research contributes to those SDGs. So well done on the work that you've done in this space. It's great. A couple of questions have come in, so I'd like to just fire a couple of questions at you.
Sure.
What happens when you receive conflicting feedback about which SDG an output is tagged against?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I mean, what we're doing at the moment with our machine learning is the machine learning can tell us the probability of a paper belonging to a certain. So I would assume, although I'm not the machine learning expert, but I would assume that if we're getting some feedback that links to one of the high probability ones, that would probably be the one that we would go more towards than one which is in the lower probability. But yeah, I'm assuming we will get that. Maybe in some cases, if it becomes too even, then we're going to have to yeah, move on and use some other feedback. But basically, the more feedback we can get, the better. So, which is why I strongly encourage you to do that. And one other thing I'll mention is that we have what's called the ICSR Lab, which is a website which is gives resources for free to the research community. We will be putting all of these data sets in there. So if you have the capabilities, want to come in and play with the data sets and do your own analysis, those can be used as well. So the feedback's not going to be held by us. We really are going to put this out there.
Okay, oh, that's great. One of the questions that came in is, do you have a sense of how closely the publication analysis of the SDGs reflects to the outcomes of the THE SDG rankings?
Yeah, well, so directly, I haven't done this analysis. The only thing I can say is that the documents that we have in SciVal and the search query which is being used is the exact same one that THE uses. So part of the metrics make up roughly about 30%, so less 30% or less for the overall ranking, for the impact ranking, and it varies per SDG, of course. But the metric side of it is exactly what I'm showing you there. We've updated the data set, so we did take an initial cut when THE did theirs, and we've updated it to include newer publications because, of course, that's of interest to institutions. But the aim is that whatever we show in SciVal will be the same data, either data sets or the same queries that are being used by THE.
Okay. A question here about why isn't the feedback site made directly available through the main SciVal website?
Yeah, so we have an SDG Resource Center which has been set up, and it's separate to just Elsevier. I mean, I know it sounds a bit strange to outside, but we RELX is the kind of sister company, so Elsevier is just one part of RELX, which is the broader company. So so not just affecting Elsevier, but affecting the whole of RELX. We have this resource center which was set up, and it was set up a couple of years ago, in fact. So if you go there, it not only covers what I've just shown, but it also has things like news articles which are linked to the SDGs, conferences which come up, research articles which are made available, newsworthy stories, etc. So it's very, very broad. So yeah, that's why it was made separate, because it's not just something which affects Elsevier, but it affects the whole of our sister company as well. So we put the information there, but it should be fairly easy to find. RELX SDG Resource Center, you'll find it there, and then yeah, follow the navigation. And if you get stuck, the links are on this slide deck, which you can have a look at later.
Awesome, thank you. I think we're just about out of time for questions now. So once again, thank you very much for your presentation today and for your work in this space, because it's really interesting space with the SDGs. And all the best with continued work in the space.
Yeah, I'll say it's very challenging work. And I say the core that we're looking to get is a consensus as best as we can on document matching to the SDGs, which is proving to be difficult, but it's something we're really going towards. And we don't want to just do this alone. We want community buy-in. We want it hopefully to be some kind of standard that can be used everywhere. So that's the lofty aim, I'll say, and you'll see how we get there next year.